Hello and welcome to the Andrew Ferris Podcast. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode of the show. Today I'm going to answer one of the most common questions I get because I talk a lot about using cost controls to run your meta ads account, bid caps, cost caps, etc. I often get asked on Twitter and with clients everywhere, why are my caps not spending? I'm trying to use bid caps, I'm trying to use cost caps, but my ads will not spend if I'm using caps, despite that when I run auto bids, they perform perfectly fine relative to my expectations. And then I switch them over to caps and it just doesn't spend at all. So what's going on? So I'm going to try and answer that question today. Now I'm going to answer it theoretically, but I'm going to do my best to get every reason I could think of as to why your bid caps or cost caps are not spending. If you have been listening to, watching my show for a little while and been vexed by this, I'm hoping this is going to help you a lot. Let's jump in. All right, I came up with 7 reasons your bid caps may not be spending. I'm going to call them bid caps in this episode, and that's because that's what I use. Those are my go-to. I use bid caps, but I don't really care if you're using cost caps or min ROAS or whatever in your meta ads. If you are paying attention to this episode, this should apply across the board, but I'm going to call them bid caps just because I think that's what I'm most comfortable with. That's what I think is the best method for most brands to be doing most of their bidding with. So there we go. So I'll use 7 reasons. Let me just set up the problem again really fast. The problem is many people will be running an auto bid on their ad account and they are spending some amount of money all the time and their ads are spending. And then they say, okay, I listened to somebody like Andrew or Taylor Holiday or whoever, and they told me that I should be using cost caps or bid caps or whatever in my ad account. And I try and do that. And suddenly my spend goes way, way down. Now, I get asked that question sort of theoretically all the time. And what I don't have time to do is go look at every ad account where that comes up. However, I do think there are some common reasons that it happens, some stuff I've seen when I've done it in my accounts, though I'll tell you from the outset, this is actually not a problem in the ad accounts that I run right now. I don't really have an issue of bid caps not spending. And I don't mean that to say that that's because I'm awesome. I mean that to say, I think it's because when you get this right and you do a few things right, this actually isn't as big of a problem as you think. If you're not spending at all, it may indicate something more fundamental in your business. And so we'll get to that in just a second. Okay, so let's talk about it. 7 reasons why your bid caps may not be spending. Number 1, they actually are spending, just not as much as you want because they're doing what they're supposed to. So let's just review what a bid cap is in this case. And again, this would apply to a cost cap or min ROAS spend in slightly different ways, but we'll do it with a bid cap first. So a bid cap is where you tell meta ads, do not spend my money on a customer unless your machine learning based forecast predicts that you can acquire that customer based on an expected click-through rate on my ads and an expected conversion rate on my ads and the quality score of my ads, which adjusts those 2 things. Do not bid on that customer. Do not put my ad in front of that customer unless you think I will be able to acquire customers at or below a certain threshold of cost per acquisition. So for example, let's say I have a $100 average order value and I want to get a 2-to-1 on my ads. I would set my bid cap, or excuse me, not that I want to get a 2-to-1 on my ads, but that I don't want to spend more than $50 to acquire a customer. That would be a bid cap. If I wanted a 2-to-1 on my ads, I'd use a cost cap, and that would give me the average. But for a bid cap, I would say I don't want to pay more than $50 for a customer. So Meta, using their machine learning based forecast, only spend if you think you can get those customers at $50 or less. Okay, so that's the idea. And so it's possible then that what's happening here is that the moment you switch your account over to bid caps, let's say, Meta is spending, but spending less than you're spending on your auto bids, except that now it's the only conversions that Meta has gotten rid of is actually the ones that you didn't want, the whole reason you switched things over. Now, there's going to be some confusion on this right away, and I'm going to come back to this a couple times because it's possible that you eliminate a decent amount of spend, and people will go, wait a minute, I was getting a 2-to-1 on my ads, I was getting a $50 CAC on average, but then you started spending way less, so why did that happen? Well, it's possible that what's happening is that Meta ads is actually just cutting off the very sort of like bottom of your spend. And I'm going to come back to this in a little bit, but you should, if you're getting a 2-to-1 on your ads right now and you run bid caps, your spend should go down. It should go down. So that's the first thing I want to point out. They're spending, they're just not spending as much as you wanted them to or expected them to, And in that respect, they're doing what they're supposed to. And that's really the big point that I want to start with here. It's possible that the reason that your bid cap ads are not spending is that they are doing exactly the thing you're asking them to do, which is to cut off bad spend or cut off spend that is going to perform above your CAC threshold. Okay, so just remember when you go in, this is the reason I made this number one, that's actually the whole point. The whole point is to cut off whatever part of your spend is bad. And then, of course, there's some other points along the way too, which is related to a few of the things I'm going to talk about here in a second. So that's number one, okay? They are spending, just not as much as you want. Number two, related to that, and this is sort of the other most obvious reason, your creative or your website or whatever isn't good enough. Your bid caps are not spending, not because Meta Ads does not have enough information, but because Meta Ads has plenty of information, and that information is telling it you are not going to produce the result you're trying to get. Many times I hear this question, and what is behind the question is someone saying, I don't know, I like my ads should be spending, or at least I want to see them spend a little bit more before I determine that they are not performing well enough to turn them off. But I think Meta Ads is actually preemptively turning off ads for you, so to speak. It's not actually quote unquote, it's not actually turning them off, but it's quote unquote turning them off, okay? Because it is predicting very, very quickly based on user engagement signals that your ads are not going to perform. And I think this is another massively underrated thing about bid caps. I think Meta Ads can figure this out very fast. I think Meta's machine learning, like within a couple dollars spent, it generally has really strong signal that this ad is not going to produce the kind of value that the user has asked me to produce. And so it's just going to cut that off ahead of time. But like I said, behind this question of like, why aren't my bid caps spending? People are kind of going like, wait a minute, is it not spending because it's not getting enough information and therefore it's not giving a fair chance to my ads? And sometimes we will combine that with the idea that sort of like, you need to season the pixel first, quote unquote. If people ask something like, if I have a new account, should I use bid caps? And my answer is, yes, use bid caps right away. And I'm going to come back to the new account thing in a minute. But basically, one of the things you should be considering somewhere in your process of why your bid caps aren't working is simply that it's because your ads are not expected to perform at the level that you want them to perform at. That is, they're doing, once again, exactly what they're supposed to do. So that is, I think, an important reason why this may be happening for you, and it's something you should consider closely. There may be all kinds of other errors, and we're going to get to those in a second, that I think are also part of this. But it's possible that they're doing exactly what you're asking them to do, and they're saving you from spending that money, and there you go. Okay, so number one, they are spending, just not as much as you want. Number two, your creative isn't good enough, or I should say more simply, your performance is not expected to be good enough, whether that's because of creative or landing page or product or whatever. Could be all kinds of things, offer, but it's just they're just not slotted to do well enough, okay? And this would lead to another third one here, which is that possibly they're just set too low. It may be that you're just asking Meta to perform better than you could reasonably expect it to because you just want your most efficient spend or whatever it is. But that's number three. You might have just set your bid caps too low. And actually, you would be okay if you took a little bit of a higher number. And this is where sort of determining your threshold for performance is really, really important work. You need to know in some real way, in some tangible way, what your performance threshold, what your performance target is going to be. And it's possible that your ads are set too low because actually your margin is like too crappy. And because your margin is not good enough, you just can't reasonably expect to get a good enough return on your ads to give you profit. Like you actually may have your bid caps may be set too low, not because you've done some math wrong, but because your business isn't that good. And so what I mean is like, if you don't have that great of margin and also you don't have that much LTV and therefore a customer is just not that valuable to you, the problem isn't your bid cap. The problem is your business. And you need to go back to the drawing board and understand whether or not this is a good business or whether it's a good business to be in on Meta Ads, right? It may be something like that. Maybe that you actually do have a decent business, but you just can't afford to pay for customers. You have to grow your business in some other ways. And again, there's all kinds of reasons for that we won't get into in this episode. But yeah, they may just be set too low. And if they're set too low, then you might not spend. Now, in that case, if your bid caps are set too low, one possibility is that actually you are setting a bid cap to an average target instead of a top target. And this is the other big possibility here. And this is where it's really important to understand the distinctions between bid caps and cost caps. Again, a cost cap is going to produce for you an average CPA. A bid cap is going to bid to a maximum CPA. And so let's take my example earlier. If I want to produce if I don't want to spend more than $50 to acquire a customer, then I should run a bid cap at $50. And actually, my expectation should be that my realized CPA, the actual CPA, is lower than that. Because what Meta adds, in fact, it should never get to $50 over at least enough time for Meta's sort of averages to hold in the larger sample. Because actually, Meta's auction is called a second price sealed auction. What that means is that as you bid a certain amount, as all of the bids come in, Meta is going to award the impression to the second highest bid. So the person who wins the bid is the person with the highest bid, but then the person with the highest bid is the winner, and they pay the second highest bid amount. That's how a second price sealed auction works, okay? So I can't even imagine how this works at the impression level in real time across millions of impressions all the time. But just like, let's say you and I, you watching this and me talking right now, are bidding on the same impression, and I'm bidding at a number that's going to be a $50 CAC, and you're bidding at a number that's a $46 CAC, and you are the second highest bidder on that impression, right? I'm going to pay the $46 price. So I win because I have the higher bid, but I'm going to pay the $46 price. That's the way the auction works. And so actually, because of that, that means that you will never actually hit your bid cap in the average. Your actual average ROAS will come in, your average CAC will come in better than your bid. And so if you set your bid cap where you set your cost cap, expect volume to decrease, because if you bid for the average, it's going to be really different than if you bid for the top threshold. This is also why I think you should use bid caps and not cost caps. You don't actually want the average. You want threshold. You want customers to come in at or below a certain target, and whatever that target is what you should set. And so there you go. So it may be that your bid caps are simply set too low, which is kind of another way of saying that your performance isn't good enough. Okay. But you may have some room to go up with your bid caps relative to your unit economics. You should know those things as well as you possibly can. And there you go. All right, number 4, this is a really common one. It's really easy to sort of get wrong, and that's that you have your attribution settings wrong. So don't forget that when you set your bids at the ad set level, you have the opportunity to bid in one of at least 4 ways, though actually I've seen some recent changes that maybe there's a 5th way coming. And that is 1-day click, 7-day click, 1-day view combined, 7-day click, 1-day view combined. And your bid is going to be relative to the attribution and optimization that you set. So if you bid a 1-day click target, but you are actually expecting a 28-day click return, and you're looking at a longer time period to measure the value of your return, then those two things are going to be misaligned. And actually, it's probably more likely to happen the other way, right? Where if you bid, maybe the way it would happen actually most likely is that you bid a 1-day click target, a 7-day click target, but you have a 1-day click potential return. And so, for example, you say, oh, I want to get $25 CAC on 7-day click, and then you never actually get there on 1-day click, because if you do that, you're giving Meta 7 full days to realize the value of the click and to assign that to the click that you bought. So if that doesn't make sense, the point is, make sure that you know that you are aligning where your bid is set relative to the attribution that you've set. For me, I bid almost everything 1-day click. Occasionally I'll bid 7-day click. I don't even know how this plays with view attribution. In fact, I don't think Meta factors in view attribution into a bid on, even if you include view attribution in there. I don't know. I can't even imagine why I would include view attribution in my default attribution settings. But I'm bidding 1-day click almost all the time. The only times I would go to a longer time period, like a 7-day click, would be if I know for a fact that this customer's going to have, or this client's going to have a long consideration cycle with its customers, and I want to sort of bid into that a little bit more. So that might be the reason I do that. But most of my clients are going to be on a 1-day click basis, and I'm going to pursue trying to get that return as much as possible. In that case, I'm setting my bid relative to the fact that I know that I'm not actually going to realize the full value of the clicks that I've gotten on day 1. What I mean is, there's going to be plenty of people who click today and buy in 2 weeks. And so I want to factor that value into my bid. So I'm going to actually take a higher CAC than you would expect on a 1-day click basis, because I know that there's going to be some additional clicks that are going to come over the next couple of weeks. In fact, over the next 4 weeks on the 28-day click return that Meta Ads gives me. And because I'm expecting that, because I'm building that, we call that delayed attribution, because I'm building that into my approach, then I know that I can actually take a higher CAC on 1 day and then expect some additional value to come over time as people get my emails and all those kinds of things. Okay. So in any case, aligning your bid with your attribution setting is really important. If you get that wrong, it's possible that you'll constrain your bid too much, or actually you'll open up your bid too much because you've sort of not understood this quite correctly, and you'll get customers for a little bit more than you meant to. So you have your attribution settings wrong. Make sure you understand that. In this case, I would say this episode, I don't really have time to dive more deeply into that issue. But if you're confused right there, or if something I said makes you go like, wait a minute, what is happening? Then that's something I would go look into. Make sure if you don't deeply understand what I'm saying, it's probably somewhere where you can do some more work, because you should deeply understand that in your media buying. Why should you use more staffing to hire incredible e-commerce talent in the Philippines? 2 reasons among the many. The first is that more staffing has built their business around quality, not just cheapness. And you don't actually just want to find the cheapest employee you can find in any part of your business. I don't know why people think this way about doing this in the Philippines, but they do sometimes. And that's just not the right way to look at it. Instead, look at it by trying to find great, incredible virtual professionals, not just virtual assistants, virtual professionals across your business, wherever you have needs for hiring. They exist in the Philippines, and more staffing is built to help you find them. And secondly, related to that, because more staffing has done this with their own e-commerce businesses, so they know what you're looking for. More staffing was founded by people who have an e-commerce business that is employing at any given time 16 people from the Philippines to run the business. They know how to do it. They coach, train, onboard, handle, and again, finding incredible e-commerce talent. You cannot add 16 members to your team and do that just on the basis of them being cheap. You have to find great quality people, and that is available to you with incredible talent for e-commerce in the Philippines. More staffing is built to help you find them. I am personally doing it right now in my business, and they have been a joy and a pleasure to work with. Go check out morenow.co to work with more staffing and hire incredible virtual professionals from the Philippines for your e-commerce business today. All right. Number 5, you are not generating enough conversions relative to your spend to get out of learning and to allow meta ads to work as best as it can. Now, this is I'm actually sort of mixed on whether this is a real problem or not, but I have occasionally seen bid caps not work very well in this case. And here I'm not talking about a problem of saying like it's a new account and therefore this is a problem. That's not at all. Some people will say this to me, as I mentioned earlier. They'll say, well, if I have a new account, should I run bid cap? And my answer is yes, because Meta is actually going to optimize your bid caps at the ad set level, and it's going to take information into account fresh on each ad set, each ad, etc. And so it will compile information quite quickly. All right. What I'm thinking of more here is like brands with very high average order values and not quite enough spend. Like I've seen furniture brands, for example, where it's like long consideration cycle, very high AOV. And, I remember seeing one brand a while back that was spending like, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of dollars a month and still only generating a couple hundred conversions across a bunch of different campaigns, right? That math might be a little bit wrong, but because the AOV got high enough that the value, like it wouldn't actually produce that many conversions. And so tons of ads would be set in learning all the time. And while I am sort of mixed on the importance of the learning phase, etc., I do think that sometimes with this sort of like built-in forecasted bidding, if you know that's going to be a problem in your brand, it can make this kind of bidding work a little bit worse in some cases, so far as I can tell. That probably still in some way means that your ads aren't performing at the level that you need them to hit the bid cap number that you've set. But yes, if you have a high AOV, relatively low conversions relative to your spend, this can create some problems. And by the way, this is one of the underrated things about running a low average order value brand. People love the idea of having a high AOV for all kinds of reasons that I actually don't even fully understand. But the great value of a low AOV is that, especially in the earlier stages of a business, you don't necessarily need very much money to start producing conversions on meta ads and learning pretty fast. Whereas you actually do need quite a bit of money for advertising if you have a higher AOV to produce conversions. It's just going to make things a lot harder. All right. Number 6. This is something I talked about in my last episode, and so I unpacked it more there, but I'm going to reference it again here, and that's that you're using your bid caps at what I'll call the bottom of your auto bids. And here's what I mean. If you are auto bidding 20 grand a day in spend, and then you decide, wait a minute, I'm going to use bid caps because somebody else told me that that would help me create efficiency and scale or whatever, then what's going to happen is that you're telling Meta there, spend $20,000. Make sure you get through that spend. You must do that with your auto bids. And then on top of that, spend as much as you can at or below my price. And then people typically will do that, and they'll set their bid cap at their target ROAS, even though they're actually already auto bidding all the way up to a number that's producing their target ROAS. So let's say their target ROAS, let's stick with CAC terms here. Let's say the target ROAS or the target CAC is $50. Spend $20,000, or they're going to spend as much money as they can auto bidding at that $50 target, which means if they're getting an average of $50 CAC, that means some part of that spend is performing worse than $50, right? Because let's say it's $20,000. If they'd only spent $15,000 in those same ads, they'd probably be getting a $40 CAC or something like that. And so the last $5,000 is not actually getting you a $50 CAC. It's getting you worse than a $50 CAC, and it's pulling that number down until you get down to that average. And so if you run a bid cap at that $50 number, now you've sort of got no leftover spend to hit it. Now, I'm going to stop there. If that notion of what I'm going to call incremental ROAS doesn't make sense, go back to my last episode and listen to or watch that episode, including, it's probably good to watch on YouTube. I have on that episode a chart that I sort of brought up that illustrated this point. I think it's a really important point for understanding the details of your media buying and for understanding where there's some cost centers in your business that right now you just might not see. But basically, I think that you should be running almost all of your spend on a bid cap. Now, if you're very high spending, maybe you found that ASC works great for you, advanced shopping campaigns work great for you, and therefore you're going to, put some of your spend. Let's take my $20,000 per day example. Maybe you put 5,000 of that into ASC because you just know you're going to spend that money every day. You take your best performing ads, you put them there, you like the machine learning there, whatever, that works. That's fine, I suppose. But I don't do any accounts that way. I run all my accounts bid cap only or cost control only. Occasionally I'll do min ROAS for a couple of reasons that are not worth getting into here. But if I'm running an account and I'm running any auto bids, just know you're telling Meta you have to soak up that spend before you get into any of the rest of my bid cap spend. So that's the key point. So bid caps at the bottom of your spend are actually probably going to be set at a target that is worse than what is achievable for you at the bottom of your spend, because the bottom of your current spend before the bid caps is probably already worse than the bid cap. Again, go back to my last episode if that point didn't make sense. Number 7, and this is another thing that I've talked about a lot, but I think is another thing that's sort of tricky here. It's this: there are less available auctions at your price today. One of the biggest mindset shifts you have to make as a media buyer if you're switching to bid caps is that you need to realize that your daily spend is going to fluctuate wildly if you run bid caps, and that's also true with cost caps and probably with min ROAS. And that's because you are asking Meta to get you a certain return on your ad spend per auction, per available auction, right? So if there are varying numbers of auctions in a given day, if there are less auctions one day and more auctions the next day, then you are likely to get less spend through today and more spend through tomorrow if there are more auctions tomorrow. It's very common on the weekends. The weekends, more daily active users on Meta ads, people are not at work, and therefore there are more auctions to win. And so I regularly see massive spend increases on weekends or on holidays or something like that than I do on other days. And so actually, this is sort of another way of saying your ads are spending. They just don't spend at the same level of consistency as auto bids do. And by consistency, I don't mean performance. They actually spend incredibly consistently on a performance level, but the volume varies a lot more. And this is where it can be a little tricky. And this is also where I tend to like to do my analysis of my performance on a weekly basis, not a daily basis, because otherwise, if you look at things on a daily basis, you're too likely to make changes based on something that sort of isn't real. And what you should be doing is instead, don't make changes day to day. Instead, allow the fact that there's going to be some volume fluctuation, allow that to just be part of the game and build your planning around that and start to look at this on a weekly level. So again, I should talk more about that concept also in another episode. That was the definitive argument for cost controls. And so I think I referenced them as cost caps in that episode, but same thing applies here. And so go listen to that episode as well. Both that and my previous episode, links will be in the show notes, of course, as always. All right, I'm sure there are more reasons, but those are the 7 that I could think of. I'm just going to recap them really fast. They are spending, just not as much as you want. which is actually because they're doing what they're supposed to. That's number one. Number two, your creative or your performance just isn't good enough. So they're constraining your spend on a performance level. And it's not because you did something wrong. It's because they're actually constraining the performance the way that you want them to. Number three, they're just set too low for all kinds of potential reasons, but they're set too low. Number four, you've got your attribution settings wrong, your optimization and attribution settings wrong. Number five, you're not generating enough conversions relative to your spend, typically in a high AOV, low spend account. I also noted there this is not a new account issue so far as I can tell. Number six, using them at the bottom, quote unquote, of your auto bids, and they're soaking up only the worst part of your spend. And number seven, there are less available auctions at your price today. And if you just hold tight and wait till tomorrow or the next day, you'll actually get increase in volume over that time. All right, that's my answer for you. If you still are not satisfied with any of those in your account, well, you should reach out to me and we should talk about it. Hang on just for a second. After the break, I'll tell you how to reach out to me and how to tell me why I'm still wrong and why they just don't work for you, no matter what I tell you. All right, that was a mouthful for me. I have my notes here today. I often do this show without notes. I just got a few ideas in my mind, but I'm trying to keep all of these straight as best as possible. I'm sure I left some out, and you should tell me about them if I did. And the ways to do that would be to reach out to me on Twitter at Andrew J. Ferris. You can email me at podcast@ajfgrowth.com. Those would be the best places to do that. I would love it if you would subscribe to the show, rate, review, all those things. You could subscribe on whatever podcast app you're on or on YouTube. You can also rate and review in any of those places. It's very helpful. And I would love if you would send this to a friend. That is actually the number one thing you can do to help me if you've gotten value out of this podcast. Okay, that's it for today. Please do check out my sponsor, More Staffing. I love these folks. I'm working with them myself right now, as I said, to try to bring on talent for my business. They've been a great partner in doing that. And so highly recommended. Virtual assistants can be helpful. Virtual professionals can transform your business. Go check out More Staffing at morenow.co. Otherwise, I will see you next time.